next up is the question, what is your take on the returns and effectiveness of the NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme? For those of you that don't know, look, and this is once again my opinion, and I haven't directly invested in NDIS properties. The jury is still out for me. For those of you who don't know, it is a national government policy, federal government policy to provide supported housing to people that have disabilities. It's a wonderful scheme. The intent of it is pure. It is designed to, throw the keys to private investors to construct housing or modify existing housing to be suitable for disabled living. All right. Wonderful initiative. It's actually quite successful in doing its intent. This question is obviously around, is the scheme an overall a positive experience for an investor? And the argument has generally been that it has great yields. This is the main benefit of the NDIS scheme for investors, is it has great yields. You might have a property, you've built it from the ground up to be suitable for a disabled resident. Okay, that might be in specialised kitchens, bathrooms, no steps, suitable floor plans. It is very fit and specific for one purpose, right? One purpose, and that is, and even in some cases, the property is constructed for a particular disability, or we have the tenant already found, and then the home is constructed to suit them. So just think about that for a moment. The home is built for a tenant, and it is is a very small category of tenants in the wider scheme of things. So therefore you are limiting the suitability of that property to a very wide buying pool, and you've narrowed your buying pool. And generally what that means is, when you narrow the buying pool, you are narrowing the pool of people potentially wanting to rent that property in the future or buy it. So then therefore there's less buyers, less demand, and therefore less growth potential from that property. It's as simple as that. But on the flip side, you're generally looking at 7, 8, 10, 15% net yield on some of these acquisitions, some properties, and in many cases the government is signing 10-year leases. Okay, so you do have income streams. So in a high level, you have a very focused, particular, bespoke property for one purpose only. Growth is generally substandard longer term. Okay, you're generally over-capitalising on the construction or the conversion because you're doing all of this extra stuff that doesn't really add to the value of the property. So it's definitely not a value-adding strategy. Okay, you might over-capitalise. You might spend a block of land for $200,000, $500,000 on a build and go to the bank to get valued for finance, and it comes back at $600,000. You've lost $100,000. You've over-capitalised $100,000. That is a common story. Okay, because the valuation is inhibited by the buying pool and the suitability of the property to a wider market. All right, so it's not really a high growth strategy. It's not really a value add strategy, but what it is a very good income strategy, and generally a pretty passive income stream as well. The government is your tenants essentially, and it is a longer term lease. Now, would I recommend it? This is obviously my opinion only. A good friend in the industry, Ian, has sort of mentioned to me once, build it and they may not come. All right. And that scares me a little bit because, you might go out there, you've got all the good intentions, you've done your due diligence, you might even have, a relationship with the NDIS scheme already formed, you're building, and the tenant may not eventuate. Things might change for whatever reason. You might have a tenant in there that is not really the best tenant. Okay. You can't really pick and choose. You might have a tenant who's had major trauma or, psychological issues in this property that is not looking after it. Okay, so you might have all of these benefits that you can't really control. We definitely have seen examples of great yields and rents. The jury is still out for me. It's very similar from a return and overall strategy to a rooming house. Rooming houses are a little bit more active, shorter term tenancies, 12-month, 6-month tenancies, multiple tenancies in the one dwelling, but you have more flexibility, you have more control and more stable risk profiles. Very similar yield profiles, very similar yield profiles, but the same sort of lack of growth and the same sort of over-capitalisation issue. So very similar strategies, it just comes down to personal preference. Look, so overall, you know, it's a due diligence process. It is a get to know. It is an advanced strategy. There's lots that we need to understand. We have never recommended it, you know, overtly. We've worked with one client who was very insistent on executing it as a strategy, and we said, look, we'll only do the acquisition, not the strategy implementation. Like all things, I'm sure there is, you know, better and worse results from it. But for me, the outcomes from it, high yield without the growth and potentially overcapitalisation, for me, I'll just go commercial. Similar yield profiles, similar sort of passive income streams. For one, there is potentially more upside for growth and sometimes value add. But for me, it is far more passive, far more stable and far more control. So that's where, you know, the whole conversation around NDIS, it's a moot point when there are other asset classes that are potentially, you know, more viable. Hopefully that answers the question. Ishta, sorry you have to jump off.